Coming up next Tuesday as part of the Unknown Pleasures series of Australian films is a film called Anak. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the director of Anak, Caleb Ribates, and the co-curator of Unknown Pleasures, Chris Luscri. Welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you. It's
glad to be with you again, Pete.
Now,
glad to
great to talk to you. Now, Caleb, I must ask you, first of all, this is such a fascinating observation of this Filipino-Australian family and their issues, difficulties, etc., especially through the father's eyes and the son who has problems at school and so on. And you shot it in black and white. Tell me about your process in deciding how you made this film and wrote it.
Well, for this film in particularly, I made it straight after my grad year at film school. And when I was finishing up film school, I had a thought to myself that I didn't really want to be a student who stops learning, because I knew that once the school has ended, there's a lot of students who will bet on their final grad film or their film school film in hopes something reveals itself. But I knew that I was just touching the surface of the craft and what I can do within the landscape of the craft as well. And so I actually challenged myself for the year to make 6 different projects just for my own personal sake, just to develop myself as a filmmaker and to challenge myself in different perspectives in how I see the craft and how I make film. And for Anak, it was the second project of the year. And every project that I was developing, I knew I had to challenge myself in a way that was challenging me back when I was a student. And one of the things was this challenging myself how to really create a space where actors can roam and behave naturally, but also limit myself how I can work within limitations and the resources that is given to me. And for this film, before I wrote it, I knew it was going to be one shot per scene because I really wanted to accentuate how I'm going to really work with these actors and how these actors can really create a story within a space. And that it's also going to be in black and white. Obviously, because I didn't have a lot of money, I knew that making it black and white will, save me a lot of money and time in my set designs and stuff like that. But really, how I can use, the tones and the contrast of the image to my advantage to create a compelling, or at least try to make it a compelling story.
Yes.
And once I had these limitations, then I started, going back to things that I want to talk about, which is this story about this father and son.
Yes, father and son in particular. And I like the way you use a fixed camera sort of approach, except for the very end of the film, which I found very interesting style that you have adopted.
Yeah, I knew that I wanted to take some inspirations, from slow cinema, like, Lev Diaz and the really incredible Thai filmmaker that I can never pronounce his name correctly. But you guys doing me direct. And seeing how they use their static images and how it reflects time and space. And I wanted to see what I can play within that realm as well.
Okay. What does Anak stand for?
It just means son or daughter in Tagalog. So yeah, it's just a direct translation of a child. Obviously it's a story about little boy, so about the son.
Yes. And was it fully scripted or was there some room for improvisation?
It was scripted, but within my process, I have a lot of room to play around. I don't like I always have the mentality of I really hate the screenplay, and I really hate the things that are imprinted. So I would say probably 60-40, 60% definitely is scripted and 40% of it just playing around with our impulses and improvisations.
Okay. So, Chris, I'll bring you into this now. Tell me about your decision to screen this film, Anak, Caleb's film, as part of Unknown Pleasures next week.
Well, it's interesting because it's what really felt like a no-brainer actually, for a number of reasons. One, I actually first heard of Caleb a few years ago through two individuals, one of whom is a friend of mine, Nick, who went to film school with Caleb, who they collaborated on each other's short films. So I was hearing that this guy, this Filipino Australian filmmaker, was like, "Oh, hang on, don't you mean Matthew Victor Pasta?" And it's no, there's this guy Caleb who's in. So that was interesting. And then obviously I heard of Caleb through Matthew Victor Pasta, who's also a wonderful, very prolific feature director, who we've long supported and featured with Unknown Pleasures. So there was already kind of a nexus of, I suppose you could almost call them sort of film familial relationships. And then obviously when I saw the film, it was like abundantly clear that, because I'd seen some of Caleb's short films, it was abundantly clear that this was kind of something else. And something else in a number of dimensions. The first and most important one, I think, was the way in which it was evolving a very specific film language, in addition to the story that it's telling, that feels very much outside the realm of what's being made in Australia. Because I think, many of us have long dreamed of, I suppose, broadly speaking, Asian diaspora cinema in Australia that draws on forms of storytelling, screen storytelling, that don't sit within the kind of hegemonic white patriarchal landscape that we talk about when we look at kind of traditional three-act narrative structures and blah, 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 blah. And it's really exciting because now that there are some of those voices kind of breaking through from the early days when we had, filmmakers like Tony Ayres and Clara Law making films, beautiful films, but films still within a particular kind of system. Now we've got, filmmakers like Caleb and Matt and Alison Shawn, who's a great friend of mine as well, who are pushing at the boundaries of the form a little bit and broadening out their cinematic reference into other cultures and other contexts. So the fact that, like Lab Diaz is I suppose a major cultural and an emotional reference point for both Matt and Caleb is fascinating to me. We don't often see that cross-cultural dialogue, I suppose, between works. Australian cinema tends to be very hermetic and very kind of squashed in that way. So that's kind of really interesting. And also, secondarily, it's an absolutely beautiful, very simple, but kind of beautifully appointed and crafted film with a very sort of poignant story. So it sort of fulfills both aims because it's also a really good narrative film. So, and then also there's the fact that the film kind of literally came from nowhere. No one had expected it. It was made very, very sort of, well, I suppose because it's an independent film, it was made very much under the radar. So when it landed at MIFF last year and it got some significant notice in screenings, it was like really kind of the discovery of the festival in terms of new Australian films.
Okay. Very interesting to hear all of that. Caleb, tell me about casting the father in particular and the son. Two very interesting identities, I suppose, the way they go through their creation of their roles.
In terms of casting, or at least within my process, when fulfilling a character, I can't really see what the character is until it gets casted. And there's a collaborator that I've worked with as a consultant for one of my short films, and his name was Lama, which is the lead, the father. And he was he's one of the OG breakdancers in the breakdance, in the hip hop scene back in the 90s. Him is always trying to pursue different crafts to really build and express himself in different mediums. And acting was one that he only done a couple of times, one with actually MVP Matthew actually, but not many times. And I knew I always wanted to collaborate with him. So I made a role that I think suited him, but also aligns with my own experience. But most importantly is, I'm not going to talk about it too much because it's pretty personal, but Lama's own personal life was, bridging the line within what the narrative entailed as well. And I hadn't known that. And so we had a discussion. He was telling me about his personal life, and it was kind of crazy how there was a lot of symmetrical, things going on between his life and his fictional life. And I made a discussion. Does he feel comfortable, working on this project because of what's going on in his own personal life? And he said, yeah, he thought that it'd be a good way to deal what he's been going through a different way. And hence why I feel like a lot of the performance within the film was so, for me, real and nuanced, was because it was just happening concurrently with what's been happening in his real life. And so that was, I think, a really perfect time for us to work together, especially for this film. And for Carlo, I put a call out to the Filipino community, and there was only one boy who auditioned, and it was him. It was Gabe. And the first audition was not. We auditioned him, and I was like, oh man, I don't know if this film's gonna work, but it ended up being the best choice.
Okay, well done, because he's really very good, and well, everyone is very good in the film, including the mother, who her role is perhaps a little bit more offside, because I suppose you're dealing more with the way men, especially in the Filipino culture, deal with the issues that they face in Australia. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Like, in addition to that, both of my leads were also non-actors. Within my work, I tend to be more attracted to non-actors, and those who are more interested in bringing their own personal experiences within the project. Because for me, it's a fiction that tries to touch within our reality and within these characters and their real personal lives, and I think that's one of my, I would say, missions, when pursuing filmmaking, is to really try and bring, our own experience, that's one that's authentic and one that is very present, into the world of fiction.
Okay. Just want to ask you about the actual static camera usage and so on, and the use of monochrome, which is very effective, I must say. Was that easy to film? Because I can imagine that you may perhaps have had a number of run-throughs of various scenes, and finding the right position for the camera would be important.
I think it was, not to say like, it was like, such an easy thing to do, but because my process really is about working and collaborating with my actors, we workshopped, and rehearsed this for months, like, just on our own time. And for me and Tavis, it wasn't really about, knowing what the shot would be, but was really interested of what it could be, and building a language between us as the cinematographer and as director. I'm not really interested in fixed realizations from pre-production. I'm more interested in what could unfold within the process, and so I'm very lenient with that. And because we all knew the language, and the actors and us had a great dynamic, it was pretty smooth. Like, it sounds like I shouldn't say it was smooth, but I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty smooth from our end during production.
Okay.
There wasn't much trails, yeah.
And you had Matthew Victor Pastor as your associate producer, I think, didn't you?
Yeah.
How did he contribute to your film?
He jumped on as an associate producer after the film was completed. He watched it, and he thought he could give me a little guidance on how to present it, and I thought that would be great. But prior to that, it was more like Matthew being a support, and Matthew being, a mentor figure, being someone who can walk the walk and talk the talk, showing that it is possible to create despite resources, despite support. When there's someone like out there doing that, it's really hard to think that you can't do it. And he was always a guidance. So in that sense, he was such a big motivation for myself and the team.
Okay, Chris, it's interesting. Apart from screening the film on Tuesday, and with Matthew's films also part of your cluster, I suppose, of films you're screening, that there could be a whole raft of Filipino Australian films that that could be curated. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's still a very small community, but it is a growing one, just as the Korean Australian, second gen filmmakers are starting to come through now as well. It just happens to be that a lot of them are in Melbourne as well, which is interesting. I don't really know why it's happening, but I would say that it's obviously got to do with the waves of migration to Australia, and similarly with with filmmakers like Alison Shawn. Alison's one of the only up until recently one of the only practicing Cambodian Australian filmmakers in the country, and now there are some people who are starting to make films. But it is really interesting when you've got the first few people coming through. It really does start to, especially when the films get screened and recognized and it's shown overseas, etc. It really starts to foment a greater sense of possibility in those, particularly coming through the film schools, like Caleb, for instance, that it is possible to make work this way, and especially when the work is uncompromising. That's a great bolster or encouragement to people to come through and really try things. Because I mean, the one thing that I can say about the kinds of films coming through in this space now is they're all quite different, but they're all equally united by an ideal, especially in the feature space, an ideal to kind of pursue the craft and the form for its own sake, which isn't to say that they're not focused toward audience, but they're building a very specific, very individual relation to that audience, which is again why it's such a wonderful film to screen in our series, because Anak hasn't been widely seen, I think, yet, and we're trying to again bring people to the screening who may be able to help the film, and certainly who really, I mean, Caleb really deserves to be recognized for the achievement, because it's a really significant film. Much less it being a debut film, it's quite a singular, impressive achievement, no matter what stage of a career that the filmmaker is at. So, it's an important. I think it's a touchstone film now in many ways. Like I hope it inspires a whole other generation of Filipino and Asian Australian diaspora filmmakers to try things.
Yeah,
and also to think about who they are as a human, who they are as artists in dialogue with. And I'm lucky in that I'm also a producer and director, and my work is very much in dialogue with the people that I've worked with, like Emil Corton Wilson and Allison and filmmakers like that. So it's really this, the whole idea of Unknown Pleasures is really about building a community around people and around films, and in recognizing the shared connections between our work, because I feel like that, it's not just the films necessarily, these kinds of films that are at risk of obscurity, because with the support structures of the Australian film industry pretty much non-existent for independent Australian feature films, but also the context under which these works could be presented are also threatened, and particularly threatened post-COVID, when cinemas are harder to access and audiences are more reticent perhaps about getting out there and seeing films in the cinema. So we're very lucky in Melbourne to have a number of what we call micro communities. I was just at a screening yesterday, Dog Milk screening in the city at Miscellanea. That was a wonderful curation of films from France. One of the Hewison gang, Charlie Hewison, really wonderful guy who works over in France, brought some films over to Australia, and it was a really great, again, cross-cultural dialogue kind of screening, and attended by, cool people, like that's the idea. It's you want to inculcate and encourage these kinds of dialogues amongst people, because that's where kind of new ideas are really born, or that they start to form and they start to kind of eventuate into things. And the hope is that other people who are equally inspired by seeing Caleb's film, there might be someone in the audience who's equally inspired by seeing the way in which it's possible to access a cinema and present a film as an independent curator, might be inspired to put on their own screenings of films, you know, whether it be Anak or other films. So it's been working. We've had some filmmakers and you know, programmers in Adelaide who've noticed what we've been doing, and they've been putting on their own micro cinema screenings in Adelaide now, which is great because Adelaide has nothing. It's ridiculous. So it's great. There's a great opening all across the country, I think, still, for this kind of work to be quite active. It's a political mission. It's a cinematic mission. It's a philosophical mission. It's all of these kinds of things, and it's why it's important, I think, to continue presenting these kinds of films.
Absolutely agree, and I'm so glad that you're doing that. So I know the screening's on Tuesday, and Caleb, you'll be there with Chris to in conversation at the end of the screening. So if people want more details, what's the website people can go to book and so on?
For the bookings, the best place to go to is the Thornbury Picture House website, which is just thornburypicturehouse.com.au, and navigate to the link on Anak, and people can book tickets through that directly. I should also say that we've got two other wonderful, well, the moderator of the Q&A is a wonderful producer named CJ Welsh, who's currently working with Caleb on his second feature film. So he'll be running the Q&A, and we've also got the cinematographer of Anak just confirmed today, Tavis Pennington, who will be participating in the Q&A as well. So it's a real great opportunity for people to come and not only see the work, but listen to the people directly responsible for making the work, discuss it. So
okay,
yeah, it's going
excellent.
To be
and
20 p.m. on 2016.
Yep. And what's the Unknown Pleasures website people can go to for more details of all screenings?
Unknown Pleasures, and again, it has a somewhat risque title. I mean, I think I've said it before, so I can say it again.
Yeah.
What is it? It's pure shit aucinema.com/unknown_pleasures. That's the website. We need to simplify the URL because it makes it very hard on radio to be able to say it out loud without feeling a little bit stupid.
Oh, no, that's fine. I understand. And Caleb, I must ask you, can you say briefly what your next film is about?
Yeah, so it's a coming of age story about these two high school students in the Philippines, really just discovering who they are and what they're not, and their passions and their dreams within their own interpersonal struggles that comes with living in the country in the Philippines. That's it for now, but I think it's going to be great. It's going to be fun, and we are going to have such a good time. We're going to go out there in the Philippines next month, actually, to start shooting, not the feature, but the a short based on the feature.
Nice. That is a cryptic, beautiful description.
I like it. Okay, and that's Anak, and we've been speaking to Caleb Ribates, who is the director of Anak, screening on Tuesday as part of Unknown Pleasures, and of course Chris Luscri, who is the co-curator of Unknown Pleasures. As always, thanks so much for talking with me, Chris, and Caleb, I hope all goes well with the screening on Tuesday.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. And
thanks, Peter. It's a pleasure as always.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you.